Hello guys and welcome back to another video. Today we're going to be going over the history of the summertime switch that had a version 1 and currently we are at the version 2 of this switch. I'm here with the creator and designer PuNKShoO and we're basically just going to be going over everything there is to know and some interesting facts that you may have not known about the production of this switch.
So to start kind of at the beginning, the summertime is a switch that I designed based on a preference that I had gotten early on in the hobby, and a group of friends and I talked about the switch that we ended up calling we called it burgundy, and that's basically a burgundy stem inside a Gateron switch. So in this case, they were milky yellows that I had stem swapped, and it was a switch that I really ended up liking the sound signature of. And I decided to take that to the community after I had gotten into switch design, and we had several successful releases with the cream sodas, the root beer floats, the melodies. And I took a poll, and we were shooting for something that was in the neighborhood of trying to get to a BCP, if you will. And so we took that premise of this switch that I liked, and we looked into the milky housings. And so the preference that we ended up coming up with, or the design rather, was something that hits in that same neighborhood of the BCPs, but had something that was a distinguishing factor, which was the ink material stem that was in those switches. So anyway, we pushed that through to production using the specs that we had kind of, as a community, pulled for months, and this included colorways and spring weights and different things like that. And we got everything set. So sometime last summer, I posted the interest check. It had a really good reception. Of course, again, coming off the heels of cream sodas, root beer floats, melodies. So, it was expected that this was going to be something that knocked it out of the park. So interest check goes around. We place all of our orders, us being the vendors and myself. And once we place our orders, we're just waiting. And when we get the first batch of switches, they're basically unusable. Like, they're not usable at all. They're so bad that none of us were able to distribute them at all. And luckily enough, Gateron was really cool, and they took the reception of that, and they're like, oh yeah, we messed up. We've got to get the molds for the stems redone again, because in this case, we're using a brand new stem mold because there's no translucent ink stem out there. So we had to do a completely new mold. So
what, sorry to cut you off, but what was the issue with that made them pretty much completely unusable with the first batch?
So what made them completely unusable is the tolerances, because the new stems were too large. So this is completely unrelated to what we'll talk about here with the second iteration of V1, but the stems themselves were too large, and these were just completely unusable. Not only were basically every single one sticking, but they just did not feel good. And if you look back at the design and the interest check, you'll see that it's a polished stem, polished bottom housing, polished top housing, and this is supposed to be like a really smooth factory switch that you don't have to do anything to. And because that stem was so large, it didn't work at all. So they sent the mold back to the factory, had it redone, and now we're talking, it's delivery time, right? It's August. So they sent it to the factory, and then the factory has to take 2 months to redo this mold for some reason. So when they finally get the mold back, they go ahead and they produce another batch of switches. But what they didn't tell me in that time was they changed the mold for the top housing as well, because they're trying to reduce, the stem wobble, right? I mean, that's a thing that we're really shooting for right now in the current markets is getting rid of that stem wobble without using box or dustproof style stems. So they go through it, they produce it. Now we're we're in November at some point, and they finally ship out the replacement switches. So those switches arrive, and when they arrived in Canada, all the switches were good. They arrived in the UK, all the switches are good. They arrived in Europe, and at the time, all those switches were good. So these vendors went ahead and distributed them. I even went as far as to use my batch for several weeks to make sure that they were good. And so we distribute them all, but then Keep Hut gets their batch. And for some reason, in the second run of the production for, this, I have to really define this. So it's the second iteration of V1s, but the second round of production because we produce so many of them.
Yeah, it's pretty much round 2 of the version 2. Or V1.5, I guess.
Yeah, there you go. That works. So Keep Hut gets those, and they're going through the switches, and they're like, "We got a problem." So we all get on a Discord call, and we're talking about it a little bit. Then we bring some of the other vendors on board. So we look at manufacturing dates, and there's like a week separation between the like the original 50K that were produced and the ones that were sent to Keep Hut. So we look at these, and we're like, what's going on? And Keep Hut notices that it's super inconsistent how the quality control is on their end. Because, when we get a batch, you go through them and make sure, they're up to the standards before you ship them out. So Keep Hut gets them in, they start going through them, and we're talking anywhere from like 5%, per handful or whatever, up to like 75% per handful. So usually when I do my own testing, I'll pull out 100 and I'll go through them. And they were doing something similar. So they ended up testing like 500 switches, and each time they pulled a batch out to test, there was an inconsistency in how bad or good they were. So we just had to figure out what to do. And at this point, we're already like 4 months past the delivery date. We gave the opportunity for people to cancel their orders they wanted to, and we again, being the vendors, they gave the opportunity to cancel their orders. But I decided that I didn't want to completely destroy the reception of the summertime, because it's a beautiful switch. It's a really pretty switch. It's got a stem composition that a lot of people were looking forward to, not just in the Switch enthusiast part of the community, but in general, just because it's a novel concept. So after talking with Keep Hut and a couple of the other vendors, I kind of pushed for this hybrid model of, if you don't want the switches, Keep Hut was willing to offer a refund for the switches. But then they also basically discounted switches to cost for folks who actually wanted the switches. So we ended up getting those out in the wild, and that's kind of, they just kind of got worse from there.
That's crazy.
Yeah. Well, when I reached out to Gateron, it took them a couple of days to figure out what was going on. And what happened was, the material that was being used, it's a certain type of nylon that is used in these switches, and nylon is prone to moisture absorption. So at least compared to other plastics, other materials that we use, in this industry. So the top housing design that they had created to reduce stem wobble had expanded somewhere upwards of 30%, and that ended up squeezing the sides of the housings enough on the rails, which would cause binding in the switches. And what's crazy is that over time, people in Europe started experiencing this issue where they noticed some expansion. So it was almost like if it was going to happen, it happened over the course of a few months, and then it just kind of stopped, because right now Serpent keys and Keebs and cables, they still have their that second 1.5, if you will,
the 1.5
of the summer times, and they're reporting that their batches are all good. I mean, there might be a few outliers here and there, so it's always possible that some of the other ones got mixed in with it. So it's really one of those things where I don't know what the exact situation is. Like, I don't know if that early run ended up getting mixed in with the second run, or if there genuinely was just some sort of humidity issue in the factory or storage. But ultimately what ended up happening is a lot of customers ended up with a switch that was ultimately non-functional. And while it looked pretty, you couldn't use it. And again, the whole premise of this switch is to create something that was BCP-like, and for that switch to be able to be used out of the box, lubed and everything. You don't have to do any kind of work to it.
And just for those people that don't know about what a BCP switch is, can you give like a simple example of what a BCP switch is?
Yes, so a BCP is a black cherry pie. It is what is considered it's a Frankenswitch. So what a Frankenswitch is cobbling together parts of different switches to create a unique style switch that has a certain feel or sound to it. And it usually consists of a JWIC H1 bottom, a cherry top, and a cream stem. So when you put all those together, you get a short travel switch that has a very nice, crisp, some might call it clacky sound, and it makes for a really good sound on certain builds. And it was very sought after, especially for like spacebar switches. But a lot of people in the high end would use them on their entire boards because it sounded so good. The problem is that by the time you add up the cost for all those switches to make a single switch, you're looking at a $2 switch.
Dang, so, that's super expensive.
Yeah, exactly. Now imagine kitting out a TKL. You're looking at almost $200 in switches. Like that's
crazy.
So it was my goal to create something in that neighborhood and bring the price down. And you have no leftover parts. You don't have junk parts sitting around, so there's not extra e-waste. Just to throw in the garbage. There's not. These switch parts that are just cluttering up your closet. You get a switch. If you tire of it, you can, get rid of it on the aftermarket or whatever. So it was really disappointing to all those people that came together and tried to make this design happen. And that's why I pushed for it rather than just sunsetting it, because the original intention was to potentially never produce them again. Now, here's what got the Summertime V2 started is we had to meet a commitment that we had over in the Asian market. So Moyu had commitments to deliver switches to some of their clients, smaller vendors in that region. And if they didn't meet that commitment, they were going to receive backlash or fees or fines or something like that for it. So we went ahead and Gateron and I found a quick resolution, which was to change the material of the top to palm, because palm is not it really doesn't have any moisture absorption properties at all. So it's not prone to expansion. So we swapped the tops for palm tops. And this was right around Christmas time. So it was like almost immediately they sent me these palm top switches, and I changed my QC policy on samples as I drive these switches for 30 days now, right? So they sent these switches. I used them for a solid month. Not a single one got stuck. Nothing got weird. So I went ahead and okayed the production, and we met those needs over in the East. And all of a sudden we start getting demand for these Summertime V2s in the West. And I think that's like what really sparked the continued production of them. So at the time, it was only like 20,000 that were produced. And by just recently, the Western markets, or vendors rather, started adopting the V2s. So we're seeing those come over. R&D KBD just got theirs this week. And you're going to have KeyGem getting theirs there in Europe. Serpent Keys will be getting theirs in the UK soon. And KeepHut will be getting theirs over here in the US. And those are already ordered. And at this point, now we're already upwards over 100,000 switches. So it was one of those things where I think the community didn't want this idea to die. They wanted this really unique ink stem more than anything, but they wanted this switch that would deliver that sound property, just really give you everything that was promised and what we all worked on together, and the colorway as well. So that's why the V2 ended up sticking around and why it wasn't just sunset altogether, because it was essentially it's a switch that is intended to deliver on the promise of the first design, but is actually doing it at a slight compromise of a slightly higher pitch top out. But ultimately, the majority of the sound and the feel of the switch is in the same wheelhouse as the original design.
That's awesome. Honestly, I'm really glad that there is a compromise made, because honestly, I love my batch, and I'll have my review out before this video goes live. But so far, I've had no issues. I love the sound profile. I love how they feel. So I'm really happy to actually get my hands on them. Is there a expected release date to announce to everybody?
It's one of those things where they're already out in the market, and if anyone that is watching has followed my switches, I aim to have in stock products. So we had to originally run a group buy for the cream sodas, but those have been in stock across vendors and they just place orders as needed. So I've got an agreement with Gateron where, we just have stock at the factory. And if these vendors need it, as long as there's still sales, Gateron will keep re-upping my stock at the factory. So right now, they've already produced more of these summertime V2s. We've got them on their way right now to those vendors that I mentioned before. You can get them now in North America at R&D KBD. I also have a few available on my website, which is fimdesigns.com. And so they're available. So if people want them, they can get them. And if they'd rather buy them from their preferred vendors, that I work with, those vendors will be restocking those soon. So they are available, they're out there, and I will keep them available as long as there's demand for them.
Awesome. So with that in mind, do you think you're ever going to come back to this concept of doing a nylon top, or do you think that's just fully scrapped? Or, maybe one day in the future, you guys with new technology or something to go back and try to revisit that initial version 1 design to see if we can make that a reality? Or do you think the palm top is the way to go for the future?
I think for this particular IP, it delivers with the palm top, and I don't really think modifications need to be made. I do want to revisit the idea for there's a switch design that I put out around the holidays called Snowdrift, which was intended to be a tactile sister to this to Summertimes. And Snowdrift is kind of it's a full milky with a full opaque milky with a hint of blue and a blue ink stem, and it's a light tactile.
Oh,
so
awesome.
that's something that I would like to proceed with, but we'll see where it goes. I think with the state of the hobby where it is right now, things are, like you discussed with Theremin, things have changed. A lot of people, because it's no longer a pandemic, there's a skew in the, or not really a skew, but the market is kind of normalizing. So reason why I'm mentioning this is that Gateron seems to be they're kind of being a little weird right now with things. So I'm in talks with them to produce an ever-free switch, and then also their new dual rail design switches. So if you've seen the Lunar something, the new switch that they've got out, and then the melodic, I'm looking to do a clicky in the melodic line, and then potentially a dual rail linear. But they're being very strict on the materials that are able to be used in those. And I'm thinking this might stem from the issue we had with Summertime. So they're being overly cautious, and they're getting very specific molds made for the materials that we'd want to use. So it's like when they release this switch, this is all you're allowed to get. In this case, it's polycarbonate top and nylon bottom.
Yeah,
so,
the standard.
Yeah, exactly. So until they make these new molds and then they try them out in-house, I'm not eligible to have a custom switch made for that unless I'm personally willing to shell out for the entirety of the switch in terms of stem, bottom, and top molds. You're looking at about $10,000 per section of the switch. And I'm a small designer. I'm not a vendor. I don't make that kind of money.
No,
so
of course, no, yeah.
I just kind of work within what is available to me, and then we work on creating these novel material combinations. And, hopefully it doesn't kill the fun of Frankenswitching, because even though I create this stuff, I'm still Frankenswitching all the time. But I want to make stuff like this more accessible to people who are maybe not as deep in the hobby. So, I will try nylon top again in the future once it becomes available, but we're just going to have to play it by ear until then.
Awesome. Well, I actually haven't really seen that many clickies hit the market. I'm not a big fan of them, of course, but I obviously like new options out there. So I'm really excited for that clicky switch. And I love tactiles. So a light tactile coming to the market with that really pretty colorway is something I'm very excited for as well, and can't wait to see.
Yeah, I can't wait to be able to do that. So we should have those molds available sometime by summer, and then I can start experiencing with that. And then I've also got the Melody V2 with B-Sun. They are shipping me those samples And hopefully I will be able to get those out within the next couple months too. So Melody will be back and we don't have to worry about Aphelion problems.
Oh, yeah, definitely. All right, man. Well, thank you so much for coming on and just sharing the history and all the struggles to make this Switch a reality. It was really awesome that at least the final product is something that's usable and really great right out of the box. Like you were saying, I did 0 mods to them, didn't have to lose them at all, and I just love typing on them. So thank you so much for that.
It's my pleasure, and I'm glad you're liking them. And I want to give a huge shout out to the community, as always, for supporting me in my endeavors. I mean, the community has been awesome. I wouldn't be where I am today with the Switch design had they not rallied behind with the cream sodas and subsequent releases. So I appreciate you having me on and giving me the opportunity to talk about it and to, at the end of the day, say thank you to everybody for making this possible.
Of course, man. It's my pleasure as well. So if you guys want to check out this Switch, I'll obviously be leaving a link to my review video, but also a link to all the vendors that will be selling this Switch. And if they're not in stock now, they will be in stock later. So with that being said, thank you, PuNKShoO, for joining us, and I'll see you guys next time. Peace.